introduction. I'm definitely going to disappoint you. After that, I'm very confident in that. Thank you, Pat. Let's see where to start. So I did catch the end of Elaine Clegg's presentation before lunch, which seemed to be hugely helpful, and everyone was taking lots of notes. This will not be helpful. What I'm about to say, I have a feeling. But at least it's a change of pace, if nothing else. So that's one thing. The second thing is, I guess what I wanted to talk about with you is represented substantially by this quote from Daniel Kemmis, who was the mayor of Missoula, Montana in the 1990s. He wrote this great book called Community and the Politics of Place, which is really about his experience as mayor in Missoula. And honestly, this book is a lot of what interested me in coming to Idaho, because it's about how difficult the work of planning and kind of community decisions about things, how unique that experience is in this part of the United States, given the history of this particular place or this particular region. And but the book is also really about the importance of recognizing that to come to satisfying decisions about places, you have to understand them to be about the place. I mean, in the sense that he talks a lot about the fact that the reason we can't come to better decisions as communities today is because we've lost this relationship to the place that we're all inhabiting. And that's much of what it's about. This quote he's talking about, he's really culture, but civilization, a group of people living in a place and all that they create can't exist in abstraction from the place. If you're expecting to be great, or if you're expecting to address any of the issues people within any community are most interested in, you can't really reasonably resolve those without understanding your place, how you share it, and how you shape it together. And I'm going to look at my notes occasionally just to make sure I don't miss something. So anyway, that's what this is kind of about, and I'll go through some thoughts about this and speak a little bit about some of my experience with this in different places. Unfortunately for you, I will mention Atlanta, Georgia, but I think there's something to take from that, and then get back to something maybe more relevant to the scale of the places you're dealing with. But this is a photograph many of you have probably seen. I'm trying to get to some issues here around what really matters in these images that I'm showing you. So obviously, I think we could all agree this is not a good situation. This is very clear that this woman shouldn't need to be walking in the traffic, on her way back from getting groceries. No one probably could argue with that, I would imagine. This one is probably something that we would all say is better. You're not in the traffic, at least. You have a sidewalk to walk on here, so you're safer. The main thing, though, about these images to me is not so much whether there's a sidewalk or not. It's the place that they're walking. So this place here, which is obviously a suburban commercial area, or this place, which probably is not too dissimilar from that. Now here's another one. Probably most of us that care about how people get around and how they get around safely and enjoyably would say this is better. You're not in the traffic, you're not on the back of the curb either, and there's grass and things like this. Probably not a lot of people walk here. I would suspect it's not I wouldn't call it a bustling sidewalk, I wouldn't imagine. And it really has to do with where it is, of course. lots of communities I've experienced spend a lot of time getting to this third image here. You know, that's certainly people shouldn't be walking in the street. Gosh, if we just have the sidewalk behind the curb, that's not great, is it? If we can get to this and we've got some separation and even some green, add some trees here, and you've gone all the way in that planting strip. And there's tremendous effort around getting to this third image here, and yet substantially it's not changing the place much. I mean, it's making that few trips that might happen here safer, and that's good. No doubt about it. But I'm wanting to obviously point out that there's something more important to be working on. It's much harder, much harder. But as hard as this is, it's much harder. But it's really what we should be concentrating on and finding new ways to concentrate on it. Here's another example. This is in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, which is a place that spends a lot of time planning and doing, you know, they do as well, and they build bike lanes and things like this. Again, you know, at least there's a space outside where the cars are in this particular case. But again, we spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to carve out a little bit of space for people that might not be driving in environments that are utterly inhospitable to people. And not that we shouldn't do it. I'm not at all saying that. We should seek to make conditions better in places like this. I'm just suggesting perhaps there's something else that we need to be spending even more time on. I don't remember what the next slide is. Okay. So the thing that is important to remember is the thing that makes cyclists safest is the thing that really makes them safest is more cyclists. You know, you've probably heard about this as it relates to even issues around helmet laws in this country and whether to require helmets for cyclists or not, and a debate about that as to whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, even in terms of safety. The question being, would the requirement for helmets somehow result in less people riding if they had to wear helmets, and that could actually make them less safe, because if there's less cyclists, then it's a less safe condition. No matter where you fall on that, it is clear that the more people that are riding bikes, the safer they are, because people driving are more used to them being there and being careful about how they're driving relative to people on bicycles. Again, I'm not sure what this next slide is. I just put these slides together for this. Oh, very different transition here. So the first point is related to what we really focus our time on, how we even speak to our communities about what the outcomes are that we're seeking. Certainly these improvements to infrastructure like the ones I was showing you are part of that, no question about it. But I would suggest that as we talk to people about bike and making people that are walking and riding their bike safer, that we put it in a different context in terms of what we could make of the places that we're serving. And so this is a place I happen to serve for almost 7 years, and I went there. It was mentioned that I worked for a small town, Davidson, North Carolina, which I'll show you, and Charleston, South Carolina for a long time. And I went to Atlanta mostly because it is so dehumanizing. It's a place that is seen as so broken when it comes to the public realm. That interests me. Like, what can we do in a case like this when you have streets like this all over the city? This is a city that in the 1980s and 90s, even back into the 70s, made a highway of every street. Not just the highways. You got really, really big highways and medium-sized highways and little highways. Everything became a highway. And so this is a relatively insignificant street in downtown Atlanta, but this is much of what the city's like. So one of the points here is that the issues related to place within any community are so specific. It's hard to really translate any one place to another, but it can be helpful, I think, to look at examples in other places and seeking to determine what about any particular place that you're working makes it what it is and what to concentrate on. So in Atlanta's case, one of the big issues as it relates to how dehumanizing the public realm was is that the city decades ago essentially made its downtown into a mall. You know, it took all the pedestrians off the sidewalks and put them in these walkways above the street, basically tried to eliminate all the people that, you know, had money to take them off the street and put them in a mall above the street. So this was a, you know, vast investment in taking people off the street that occurred in the 70s mostly. So it's created a situation now where the city's really suffering because people that want to be in cities want a city. You know, I'm not going to go into a city, into the middle of a dense city, and get like a suburb or something or a mall. Why would I do that? I'll go to the suburbs and go to a mall. That's way better. So you're not winning at the one thing you should be winning at, which is being a city. It's the one thing you can win. So anyway, in that particular, this was a big issue there because it's a it's, you know, it's the center of the city. It's the place that people identify as the center of the biggest city in the South in the United States, and it's really suffering. So it's also very difficult because people got used to this, that we gave everything to cars, and as a result, we were losing our downtown. And so in this particular case, it was important to go there because of the weight this particular place holds in the hearts of the people in the city. So we went to that place and designed what it's called a shared street for 4 blocks of it, something that's digestible but significant in the densest center of the city. Designed a shared street, went through a big public process, involved everybody in it. We actually then implemented phase 1. This was a 4-lane highway essentially through the middle of downtown Atlanta. This was our demonstration project that we used. Ian's firm, who you heard from this morning, helped us with this. They did the planning with us, and then we installed the demonstration project 1 here, which took lanes from cars, brought everything in, landscape. The center, this street actually literally had fences on either side of the back of the curb so nobody could walk across the street. This is in the densest center of your city. You don't have this condition. My point is, this is the place you had to go in Atlanta to move people. And when you're dealing with a city of that scale, you had to go to the center of where the problem was, and that's what we did there. Another example is, this is a few blocks from there. This is Broad Street in downtown Atlanta. And I love this example because this street right here, this block of this street, which is near Georgia State University and has wonderful buildings around it, and it's got some vibrancy, which is not usual for downtown Atlanta. This street, as you see it in this photograph, had been pedestrianized. That image I'm showing you, which is before, is we pedestrianized the street, but in Atlanta fashion, you could still drive there somehow. I didn't understand that, but anyway, people were upset about this thing of, hey, we pedestrianized the street, but there's still cars on it. So we went through this process and designed this plaza space here, which was just amazing. And you know, everybody starts to get this sense of community around it. It's getting programmed, and you know, all this activity associated with the plaza space that's there. Unbelievably, this is the only plaza space that has been built in any public place in Atlanta in decades. This little thing here, this was an image in the New York Times of this young actress in Atlanta. They were doing a story about her, but they used the plaza space to take the photograph. The point is looking for these places where you can have a big impact on people's relationship with the city, the place. I always used to say in Atlanta, people don't have any relationship with the streets because they're just driving in them and parking and things. They don't know the street. I mean, so you've got to, in your place, look for those things that are heavier weight in terms of addressing them, as hard as they might be. Peachtree Street, the hardest place to do this in downtown Atlanta, but that was the place we had to really get people thinking of this kind of cultural change that was needed to such that we would have that relationship with the place. This is a different location, and I wanted to transition to something that's a little bit more akin to a lot of the scale that you're dealing with. So I was hired as the first planning director for Davidson, North Carolina, which when I was there had a population of 5,000 people. I was the first planning director they ever hired. Davidson College is there. So of the 5,000 that lived there, 1,200 of them were college students at Davidson College. And the reason they hired their first planner was because the growth was coming and they felt it was going to forever change the town. So this is a typical public meeting. You all have been in these kinds of meetings when you're proposing a sidewalk or something or anything that someone might get upset about. And anytime you're in that experience, it's emotional for people. So it's you're basically trying to help people navigate things that they're struggling with, change, things like change. But back to this issue of place, as much as it was substantially in Davidson's case, even about transportation, we recognize that the way you get to solutions was not so much just focusing on the intersection or the sidewalk or this or that. It was really the place itself. So we had this huge effort. There's farms around Davidson, which Davidson itself had a relatively small footprint around an agricultural region. And this is me with Hugh Barger, who is a prominent farmer at the edge of the city. And we worked on a plan to protect the farmland. And through zoning incentives and things like this, which was later, got a lot of, the EPA was really happy with it because the agricultural land around the town was protected. But the issue was that we couldn't just concentrate on the one problem. We had to look at the entire thing and come to a decision around how do we ensure that the place is as protected as it can be, and that the growth that comes, because it will come, kind of reinforces the unique characteristics of this place. And I told this story when I got to Atlanta that, every place I've been has the worst traffic anywhere in the world. In Davidson, it was at the intersection of Main Street and Davidson Concord Road. That was the worst intersection. If you talk to people in Davidson, that was the worst intersection ever, anywhere. It was just unbearable. The same goes for King and Calhoun Streets in downtown Charleston. When I got there, I learned that was, in fact, the worst intersection in the world. And then when I got to Atlanta, I learned it was actually Peachtree Street and Lenox Road. Those were the worst There's nowhere you can go that people are satisfied with traffic. You could go to a small town in the middle of Iowa, and on a Sunday, and when people get back from church, they'll say, boy, there was a lot of traffic in downtown on our way back. It's just a constant, to focus on that is just not helpful. It's really about the place you're creating. And every place I've been, this has really been the question, is bigger better? And this is an image from the Charlotte Observer about Davidson when I was there. And it happens to be that in the places I've been, they've been growing quickly. But there's the same thought about any place, regardless of its trajectory of growth, whether you're growing modestly, whether you're even shrinking. Coming to solutions around anything has to do with recognizing what makes your physical circumstances and the culture and people that it's different than other places. As it relates to traffic in particular, the thing that I sometimes is helpful with people is we know we'll have traffic. If we're successful, we'll have traffic, that's for sure. But the question is, what else will we have as a city? Paris has a tremendous amount of traffic. It's choking in traffic. They also got a pretty good city, So that's what's there is to concentrate on. What's the place that you have, not whether you have traffic or not. So this is an example of that in a European setting, and it's interesting because I feel like Idaho, in a way, benefits from looking at kind of European examples of places because you have places of many sizes in European countryside and throughout Europe, and yet there is a stronger relationship between the place, and in Idaho's case, so much of the state is publicly owned, and in so much of the state, agriculture is a really significant, not only something nice to have, but a significant of the economy of many parts of Idaho, that it's helpful to look at European examples of places that are really my size, but as they're growing, this is the thing, you know, in this country, we have always moved apart from each other. Anytime there's any decisions to be made or growth that's occurring, the decision is let's move apart. You know, so whether it's in cities, let's move to the suburbs, or whether it's in this country, when Europeans arrived here, let's move west. It's always, let's get further apart, further apart, further apart. And the problem is we can't do that anymore. You know, we've got to find solutions around us getting closer together. And that's what much of this book is about, by the way, is that we've got to recognize that the solution to these big problems like affordability, mobility in particular, but even changing to adapting to a changing climate requires that we just change the pattern of the way we do things and move closer together. So other examples of these are not, but can we, every time we make a decision about something, you know, you go back to this. That's why I said this is so much harder, so much more complex, because you're dealing with a whole collection of community-related issues here, not simply the one about whether there's a sidewalk or not, whether the sidewalk's on the back of the curb or behind a planting strip. This is much harder and requires a lot of leadership within any community. And I'm not saying, again, don't do everything. I'm just saying it's interesting to begin to frame the discussions anytime you're dealing with a specific issue. I want to build this sidewalk. I'd like to create this plaza. We need this bike lane, to cast it in the context of the place that we're all trying to build together, and how coming together around lots of decisions, including that sidewalk or that bike lane, are in furtherance of that future we're seeking together, which solves many other problems. It's never that very kind of tactical issue. It's a bigger thing. The compelling part of all that you do is really the bigger thing. Yes, it's the individual thing, but it's also the bigger thing. And I think that's sometimes what we don't spend enough time concentrating on. So whether it's those European examples or lots of other examples in this country of places that are places that we would all think of as places that are safe and enjoyable and where you prefer to walk and ride your bike, has to do with the scale of the place and the intimacy of it and all those things, much more than it has to do with the sidewalk or the bike lane. So that is the conclusion of my remarks. And like I told you, not very helpful in the overall scheme of things. But anyway, with that, I'll happy to take any questions, or I do prefer comments to questions. But anyway, anybody have a question or comment on any of that? Yes.
Where do you see Boise today? Where do you see it going during your tenure here?
Yeah. The question was about Boise and where it's going. I'll say, you know, one good thing about when I arrived here is that the city's working on a new zoning ordinance. Had been for about 18 months to 2 years. So I got to come into a very active public conversation about the regulations around development, and have been able to participate in that for more than 6 months. And it's been hugely beneficial for me to spend so much time with people, and not just in these public meetings, but even I've gotten invited to a lot of smaller meetings with groups of people to talk about these issues. I had a meeting on someone's front bench probably 6 weeks ago to talk about these things, a group of people that was highly concerned about where the city's going and why it's going, and those discussions are so valuable. And what I have found pretty consistently in my discussions with Boise residents is that they do care about all these issues. You know, like this whole thing of Boise isn't to the point where it's too late. You know, like we can address some of these issues during this period of growth such that we avoid having to repair damage, like you see in a city like Atlanta, for instance. And a lot of recognition that all these issues we're discussing are ones that warrant solutions. So like housing affordability, the fact that we need a greater diversity of housing types. You know, right now we just have a few types that we build. We build a single family house, we build a townhouse, we build a 5-story to 8-story apartment building. Once in a great while, we'll build a taller apartment building, but that's basically it. Which just isn't enough. You know, I mean, and historically was not what Boise was. You know, we probably had twice that or more different housing types. So how do we, through the zoning, which we basically made all that diversity of housing type illegal, we told people you can't do all that stuff, you got to just do these few things. How can we go back and allow that greater diversity? And people seem to be very supportive of that. And the question is, how do you do it? And that's what we're doing with the zoning ordinance. And on mobility, this whole point that the city should build itself around pathways and in ways that people will have to drive less, that our only solution to a transportation problem is that we organize ourselves on the land such that people can drive less. Not that people won't drive, of course they will, everyone will. But if we could get the average home from 10 car trips down to 8 per day, I mean, can we shoot for 6? I mean, now you're solving problems when you do that, because the way we've been headed is we assume everyone's going to drive to do every single thing. And that's what gives you Atlanta, congratulations, or Phoenix. So, because that's the approach they took. So again, to your long answer to your question, but when you go down and I'll finish with the climate change thing, the fact that we need a development pattern that is less water and energy consumptive than the pattern that we've had in cities in this country.
Hey, good afternoon. Is Quinn in today?
Is that a comment or a question? If you look at cities, and I'll use Salt Lake since it's nearby. If you look at the region of Salt Lake's growth and the city of Salt Lake's growth since 1970, the regional population has exploded, of course. It was like less than 1 million people in 1970. It's more than 2 million people today. The city of Salt Lake's population has been static at 200,000 during that period. That set of information kind of tells you everything you need to know. and Salt Lake is not unusual among American cities. And that is, you know about the perilous nature of the Great Salt Lake and the relationship between the lake and the mountains and how that's been disturbed by the way they've developed, the catastrophe that's looming. And that is a product of the development pattern. So, I mean, there's another thing, a lot of recognition in Boise of we don't want to be the last city in America to do that. So I think all of that community concern and acknowledgement gives Boise a great chance. But in the zoning ordinance is a real litmus test for this as to whether the city can take concrete steps to address those issues. And the zoning ordinance will be, presumably, if we don't run into some big problem, adopted by next summer. So that's a great move in that direction. I forgot what the question was, but I hope that got near to the answer, Pat. Anybody else? Yes.
Yeah, I certainly like comments better than questions.
Yeah.
I really like this idea of place. So I'm a city planner. I don't work in any government-related thing, and kind of the path what brought me here, I think, was walkable friendly development. Talking about bike lanes.
Yeah, right. The one thing I'd say about that is this isn't unique to this community, is just this um, reluctance to support the change that's needed to further that place that you're describing. And what I mean is, back to this issue of we tend to want to push people away as the solution to maintaining what it was that we fell in love with, right? I mean, all that you just described about the North End and coming to Boise and how charming it is and all that. Typically, and I'm not speaking about you, but I'm just saying in most places, the response people have to growth is then don't let it happen here. Move people further away from me. And it's counterintuitive, but that's the exact wrong thing to do. Because then people come and they occupy places where they have to drive to and where it's further and further out. And you know, it erodes that uniqueness in the process without giving you any of the benefits that come with let's figure out how to occupy this place in a similar way to the way we've occupied it, but also, you know, adding a lot more people and activity. So I mean, this city has a lot of surface parking lots, you know, and a lot of underutilized property. You know, I think if you go around, you might reasonably say, wow, we could accommodate a lot more people here. And yet the reluctance is, what about the parking? You know, that's hearing that a lot in the zoning ordinance thing. Why are we reducing parking? You know, it's like, well, my goodness, we're, but you know, so anyway, that's just kind of the point from that is obviously I agree with you, but I just worry about people thinking that the solution is somehow to stop things from happening. And it's just not. That's what they thought in all those other places, you know? Yes. Yeah, yeah, go ahead. Sorry. Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Oh, well, I mean, she should say it. Maybe she should come up and say it because she said it so well and she's working on it. But it had to do with how you approach this conversation with people and thinking about the transportation investments as similar to thinking about land use, how you use land use. Uh, yes. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. You know, I don't know Ketchum and Haley well, but I do have a question for you about this. So she's speaking about how to deal with parking in a case like Ketchum and Haley. And do the towns in that case, so Ketchum and Haley, are they involved in the parking that's provided for the downtowns? I mean, is the government providing parking?
Yes,
Okay,
some
yeah,
parking areas, the government.
yeah, yeah. Because the reason I ask is, one is the first thing that you said, which is people in this area say that there's no land to build on, and that the observation that there is land to build on is a very important one, because, and it could be worth, in a case like that, really doing an inventory of what land exists to build on. And it may be land that people don't think of as land. You know what I mean? Like, whether it's parking or it's buffers, there's, we spend so much land in buffers and berms and things like this, to really look at, because I'm saying this because it's an emergency, right? This is an emergency situation in Ketchum and Haley's case, in Bellevue and on that whole area. This is an emergency. It's not something where you're talking about going to extreme measures for people that work in the businesses that serve us in order, and other things, just for people to live here. We're talking about going to extreme measures to address these issues. That means in an emergency situation, we've got to look at our land differently. And by the way, that's not counter to what these places were. I'm sure in the history of Ketchum and Haley and places like this, it was different. Everything didn't become so prescribed to be landscape or buffer or berm or parking or even right of way. There's, you could, who knows? You could have hundreds of units in the right of way potentially if you've got excess right of way. I just think this whole thing. So the first point I think is one that's really important that the community ought to really dig into and say, in an emergency situation, what is the land that we actually have as a resource? Because there's so much creative work in how you build housing, for instance, awkward pieces of land. All over the world, there's great examples of that. But the second part about parking, I'll ask the question just because, thinking of parking as a resource in a case like that, and really part of the infrastructure that the city needs to invest in. And, Charleston was a great example of this, where the city years ago said, we're not going to have a bunch of people building parking decks. I mean, you have this case here in Boise too. Charleston's advanced in terms of development, but so the city invested in strategically, we're going to have parking here, 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 here. These are the areas that are really going to grow and need parking. So we're going to invest in that. So we publicly invest in the parking in those locations, and then no one else is building parking. Because it's not that you have parking, of course you do. It's probably more parking than you think there is, no question. It's just, it's not utilized to its fullest. So in a place like that, which has these extreme conditions around properties, not property value rising, and the difficulty around running a business or building any kind of housing that's any way affordable, then we need to invest in this in a way that maybe we haven't before. So those are the first thoughts that come to mind for that particular situation. Did you have something, Cynthia?
Yeah. So we have a lot of people attending virtually and locally who are they're not from the Boise area. Orfino and Sandpoint, all these other places. What would you recommend that they do when they are trying to get their main road slowed down, less car-centric, bring back the local economy for small businesses along that?
Elaine? um, Well, I mean, I guess, Cynthia, the question would be, I mean, I'm guessing there's just such a variety of circumstances around main streets and towns and places in Idaho. Um, you know, you got a main state highway coming through that you've got to deal with ITD about, or you got a bypass perhaps that means that there's less activity on the street. I think the circumstances are so particular to the place. And there's been lots of good work on main streets and so forth. I'm stalling. Uh, so I wish I had something helpful to say. But, you know, I think, though, that the discussion around Haley and Ketchum, while they have their unique circumstances, I will say I feel like the places I've seen in Idaho, and I've seen many of them, there's so many distinctive places that if people could just concentrate on, on the details around what investments will have the biggest impact, as small as they might be, related to the uniqueness of that place. And I'm sorry to use the Atlanta example just because it's at such a different scale, but this whole thing about Peachtree Street was, that was the hardest place to do it, but it had to be that place because it had a certain consciousness. And everybody has that in their community at different scales. And, and, uh, and again, speak of it in terms of the place that we're creating versus the, the, the kind of technical solution that it may bring us, you know. So anyway, this might be the last question, I know. Yes. Mhm. Yeah, I mean, for me, in Boise's case, the as it relates to kind of regional travel, I guess is what you're describing. Is it reasonable to say that? Um, the two things. One, first of all, is the perilous nature of agriculture and nature otherwise at the edges of Boise and the rest of the region. So Boise, Kuna, Meridian, Caldwell, all that. The perilous nature of agriculture and nature at the edges of this region. Number one, if we continue to lose that the way we are losing it, we're Salt Lake City, here we come. You know, I mean, that will be so that's a really important part of this is when you talk about regional travel, if we keep proceeding further apart and keep going, then probably there isn't a solution that's going to work. Everybody's just going to be in traffic. I mean, because when you go into and Salt Lake is kind of this way in a way. The development pattern was set. I mean, Phoenix is an even bigger scale example of this. If you go on the light rail line in Phoenix from the airport to downtown, you might reasonably say, why did we do this? You know, I mean, well, it was already done. The problem was you were done. And so you had made your city, and it's as sprawling as it can possibly be. And then you went in and tried to retrofit a solution. It's too late. You know, I mean, LA's trying to do this on a bigger scale, obviously, and they'll have more success in little pockets, but it's not going to change the utter condition there. Boise still has that chance. But first, protect that agricultural area and nature otherwise. And I know it's easy to say, hard to do. That means Canyon County and other people. And then the second thing is, I think the only helpful regional transportation investment we can be working on right now is a transit line along the rail corridor of some kind. So that would be the one that goes from the depot to the mall to Meridian to Nampa to Caldwell eventually. And I don't know what the technology is, but to me, that's the only helpful investment we can make regionally, because that is something you can shape your region around that's different than Atlanta or Phoenix or Salt Lake City. you can actually shape your place and it will affect so many communities in a positive way. What else is there? You're going to tell me you're going to add a lane to 84? Somebody said to me when I got here, the good news about traffic in Boise is that 84 connector interchange is really poorly designed. If we can make that a good interchange, we've got this solved. I just came from Atlanta, man. No. We got the best designed interchanges in the world, and they're choking in traffic. If you go that way, you will be that. So the thing we have to work on that's productive is this. The Cunamora Expressway, a new interchange somewhere, you're talking billions potentially of dollars wasted to make the very situation you described for that person wanting to come from a farmland. We just can't do that. Yeah. So far. All right, well, that's a uplifting final note there.
Okay, we'll meet back here in 10 minutes. I just want everybody to know I went to college in Atlanta and I watched those freeways get expanded in the 80s and it was horrible. We don't want that here. All right, 10 minutes. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Tim.